Hello and welcome to the week that really was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 2nd of May 2025. Happy bank holiday weekend to those who celebrate. Thank you to the workers who struggled for so many years to give us this most socialist of all bank holidays. Sarah and I have a lot to discuss this week. We're going to talk a little bit about immigration. We're going to talk about the amount of money that people are getting for as a result of the government's immigration policy. We're going to talk about what's happening in Carrickmacross. We're going to talk about the carbon tax being put up again. We're going to discuss Micheál Martin and his redefinition of what it means to be an Irish nationalist, or at least what it did mean all the way back in 1916. And then we might have a bit of a wonder about how many genders Regina Doherty truly thinks there are. Sarah, how are you?
I'm good. That's a full lid there this week, isn't it?
It's a full lid, yeah. We'll try and give each topic the attention it deserves, but we also will try not to hold people for that long, in part because we don't want to bore you, and in part because I'm missing the first half of the Manchester United Athletic Bilbao match. All right. I'm going to just start. Sorry, you haven't said much. I'm going to introduce this story because those of you who watch Gript's weekly news live stream, which my colleague Gary Kavanagh hosts with my other colleague Fatima Gunning, will know about this already, but many of you who listen to this podcast will not, which is that at Gript Media, we have been doing some work for the last couple of months. When I say we, by the way, obviously I'm the editor, I'm going to take the credit, but I've done none of this work. The others have been doing the work. To put together a full accounting, Sarah, of exactly how much public money, that is taxpayers' money, has been expended on the hosting of migrants in Ireland. And by hosting of migrants, I mean this is where the state takes over a hotel and pays it not to be a tourist entity, but to host migrants instead. Oftentimes, this is a hotel operated by a private company that is contracted by the state. The state pays it money to accommodate, feed, and keep secure the people living therein. And we wondered exactly how many of these companies are there, how much money are they getting, and who owns them. And we are very close to having answers to those questions in full. The hardest one to answer is who owns them, because so many of these companies are hidden behind shell companies and other shell companies and other shell companies. And it's like dealing with Russian dolls, because ultimately, for whatever reason, many people who own these companies like keeping their identity hidden. Now, my colleague Matt Tracy, those of you who read Gript will know, has done a lot of work on exposing many of those people. But for our purposes here today, we're just talking about the money. We're just talking about how much money has gone to how many companies. And the figures are as follows, Sarah. Over the last 5 years, the Irish taxpayer, that's you, me, and everyone else watching this, even if Vincent Brown used to say, taxpayer was a horrible phrase, but we are all taxpayers. If a child buys a sweet in the shop, it pays VAT, it's taxpayer. We have spent collectively 4.4 billion euros on accommodating migrants through private companies in Ireland. That is, for those of you who don't know your billions from your millions, that is 1 million euro, 4,400 times. 4,400 million euro, 4.4 billion. That is what we have spent. Over 150 individual companies have received more than 10 million euros. The top earning company on this list has received 150 million euros. These are all Irish people. Some of them aren't, some of them are foreigners, but the majority of them are Irish people living in Ireland who are receiving enormous transfers of money from the state in a process that I think is one of the most opaque and obscured and hidden that we've ever had. Because in many cases, we don't know who's getting this money. We don't know who they are. We don't know their tax status. We don't know their suitability to do business with the state. But the state, in its sheer desperation to cram as many migrants into as many hotels as it can, is pouring out money in enormous sums to hundreds of companies. And we will be publishing over the next few weeks a full database of who those companies are, and as best we can tell, who is connected to them. So I think that's a big story. Obviously, I have a vested interest in calling it a big story because it is our story. But I just wanted to. You I think are hearing of this for the first time as I'm saying to you live. Mm-hmm. So what do you make of all this?
Well, I think that, I can't remember how long ago it is now, but there was a point at which it must be, is it a year now, where there was tents piling up along the canal. And that was a news story. It was a big news story on Mount Street. And I had reason at the time, we discussed it on the podcast, I had reason at the time myself to be in Mount Street one day, and I was quite shocked at how bad things had gotten on Mount Street with tents and people with nowhere else to go. And I think that the government did a good job but a cynical job of removing those people from there and putting them into centres and pushing them out of the capital city and putting them into other places where the problem that they had created for themselves was less visible. And I think that they have done a reasonably good job for themselves of adopting a little bit with the public of a sort of an out of sight, out of mind approach when it comes to migration, particularly in Dublin, where, let's be honest, the majority of the media are. But I think those numbers you're talking about there are the first real strong evidence of just the scale of what we're talking about and the scale of the cost to the Irish taxpayer of what this really, really poor prolonged process that the Irish government have allowed to continue for processing of people who are coming here seeking asylum or international protection applicants. And I just think that those amounts of money are just so vast. And the fact that it's all behind closed doors and a bit hush and it's been pushed out of sight and out of mind, as I said, has allowed people, I'm not saying this is a compliment, but people who are business minded or entrepreneurial to take complete advantage of that for their own financial benefit. And that's why the bill is so big. I could start listing off all of the things in Ireland that you could spend that amount of money in, but let's be honest, the amount of money that Ireland is going to spend on migration and processing of migrants in Ireland is never going to be zero. So, but the point is, that's the figure. What was the figure 10 years ago? Do you know what I mean? Because I guarantee it was very different.
It was a fraction of this.
Exactly.
This, by the way, I want to be very clear. This is not the full picture. This is not the full cost of Ireland's current immigration system by any stretch of the imagination. This is purely money paid to private companies in relation to accommodation. So it doesn't take into account people who are in state facilities. It doesn't take into account people who are living in social housing, having had their case adjourned or being appealed. Doesn't include the costs of, and I'm not saying we shouldn't pay these, but the costs of feeding people or providing them with welfare or providing them with a basic income while they're living here awaiting their application. This is just purely what these companies are getting to accommodate people. And what bugs me about it, Sarah, as a citizen and somebody who believes in good government, is the lack of transparency in relation to it. Like, as I said, you go into some of these companies and it is a series of Russian dolls. It's an Irish company owned by a company in the Isle of Man, owned by a company in Jersey, owned by a company in Malta, owned again by a company in Ireland. And by the way, here's a woman who's a company secretary for 400 different companies. That's what she does for a living. And the ultimate beneficial owner is very hard to define. We know who some of these people are. Seamus Banty McEnany, the former manager of the Monaghan football team, and I think the Wexford football team, or certainly a few other football teams, is one of the wealthiest immigration entrepreneurs in the country, with a whole series of properties that he leases to the government for the accommodation of migrants. His companies are on our list with the publishing. He has received tens of millions of euro, or sorry, I should say, to be completely correct, companies he controls have received tens of millions of euro in respect of migrant accommodation. And we'll come on to a little moment to the situation in, ironically, his hometown of Carrickmacross, where there are real problems here. And I think there's a real question here about who is getting all this money. What are their relationships to the people involved in making the decision making? Because we can't, you can't tell that when you've got a company that's a shell company receiving a whole lot of money from the taxpayer. The taxpayer has no way of figuring out, and I'm not making any accusations here, but I am saying the taxpayer has no way of figuring out if that is owned by somebody's cousin who's also got some kind of role somewhere in maybe promoting that decision. It is an appalling way for the state to be handling, I think, the public's money.
What I also just think is really funny and fascinating as well, and I understand, and people who listen to this podcast will know, I presume, that, applications for these kind of centres and housing are subject to less scrutiny, for want of a better word, than other applications. But I know of people right now, one in particular who listens to this podcast, who at the moment is making an application for a business lease, just for a business, an existing business that's quite that is successful. And the hoops and the rigmarole and the nonsense to apply for a lease and make yourself a good candidate for a lease and whatever in the normal course of business in any other scenario other than this is massive. And people, are expected to do due diligence and show accounts and show this and show that. And I think a lot of people who had businesses, and I'm not speaking about anybody who may or may not be on that list, but I think people would appreciate that this is the case when you look at some of the locations. People who had relatively unsuccessful business, these, where these places will make up a small hotel that wasn't financially viable, that wasn't turning a profit, that wasn't particularly, and is now making you 10 million, right? It's kind of like, as you say, the lack of transparency, but it goes back to that thing that nobody spends money like when it's like they do when it's not their own money. And we have I've said it 20 times before, a strange relationship as a country with the spending of money. And we don't expect, or we don't treat these kind of, we don't have a kind of a system that really scrutinizes these kind of deals, we'll say. So if you have a hotel that has, we'll just make it up. If you have a hotel that has 50 rooms that can house, let's say every room can house 2 people, so 100 people, right? And the maximum turnover of that hotel on your current rate card is, we'll say, 25 grand a night. Well, then 25 grand should be the maximum that the state will pay you for staying. But that's not what's happening here. So what I'm saying is that some of the amounts of money that some of these hotels and these places are getting is far in excess of they ever would have made with a full house, full private paying customers. And why is nobody who is negotiating those deals and nobody who is organizing this looking at it just at that basic level? And then the next thing is, and I strongly suspect this is, it's because it's all so rushed and it's all so chaotic, and the applications are piling up on arrival. There's nowhere for them to go, and nobody has the time to scrutinize those kind of figures. But that's a symptom of a massively, massively overheated, problematic system, which, look, we know that. But I don't think Joe taxpayer or the average person has really thought about or certainly has never been given the opportunity by the media to have a think about what the actual costs are, or some of the costs, as you say, are. And now they're going to. And I think people are going to be really angry.
Yeah, I think there are some people who will say, when you put figures out like this, that you're kind of appealing to the old Irish spirit of begrudgery, right? That you're just like, oh, look at these. You're not, it's actually the government. Because let's be clear. The people who are making this money are not responsible for the government's immigration policy. They are not the people who are making the policy in the country or bringing the people in to make it necessary. They are simply people who are profiting from it. But I will say this, there is a difference between being an entrepreneur, i.e. somebody who goes out and innovates and comes up with a product and puts a really good product out there and makes money off the marketplace from doing it. Whether that product could be something as simple as running a hotel that people want to eat food in, sleep in, and all the rest of it. And then there's this, which is simply rent seeking from the government, seeing a desperate opportunity and taking free money that's being offered. And, some of the carry on here is shady. Like you mentioned, the government tells you what its priorities are. I don't know if anyone read during the week, Michael McDowell, who sometimes writes things I disagree with, but often writes things I agree with. And he wrote an article this week about the planning system in Ireland and how it is almost impossible to get anything done. Except to get an asylum centre open, where basically all of the planning restrictions go away. I mean, we can't build a metro, a project that might improve the people of Dublin's existence for the next 40 years has to go through hoop after hoop after hoop after hoop, with on board Panola and the courts and judicial review and all those things. But if you want to turn Thornton Hall, which was at one point going to become a prison, into an asylum centre, you just get a planning exemption. Government tells you what its priorities are by what it can do efficiently when it puts its mind to it. And I am concerned that I think partially what you're saying is true, that there's just a panic to sign all these deals. But also, there's something deeply wrong here when 4.4, but this is not a small sum. This is actually, it's vastly more than the Children's Hospital. And we've been talking about that for years. being handed out to people who we don't know who they are to put people up in hotels. And the final point I'd make is you said, what would those hotels be making normally? But I just want to make the point that people are forgetting that the level of service that you have to provide to migrants actually is an awful lot lower. So if you've got a hotel, Sarah, and you say it's making 25 grand a night, one of the reasons it's only making 25 grand a night is because you've got guests there who need their sheets cleaned every night, who need their breakfasts made, who expect like a varied menu when they go into the restaurant, who expect to have a certain quality of stuff in the minibar in the room that all has to be paid for and serviced.
But they're drinking, and you could also argue that they're drinking and spending money in your hotel that migrants aren't. So if you balance it all out, we'll say it's the same. But John, I also think that you're letting people or letting the government off a little bit, because supposing your Auntie Mary dies next week and your Auntie Mary lives in Cong in Galway, which is a town.
Is Cong, right? Cong is in Galway. I was going to say, if you're offended the people of Mayo there, my West of Ireland geography ain't great.
Close to the border, but I'm pretty confident Cong is in the county of Galway. Anyway, and she owns a small hotel there, and she leaves that hotel to you. And the hotel is run down, not in great shape, barely making any money. The odd time Americans accidentally stay there because they want to see where The Quiet Man movie was made, right? And you inherit this hotel, barely making any money. It's a bit of a pain in the arse, to be honest. And then all of a sudden you see an opportunity to house a load of migrants there, and you're going to make 10 million quid. Are you telling me that you would say, for the greater good, I'm not going to do that? Because So no, I'm not even, you don't have to answer, right? But the point is that people, like we have all kinds of regulations and rules to stop people from being able to rip off other people, businesses, the state, whatever. And so it's to your point, it's the easiest thing ever to get an application for a migrant centre through, but it also is too easy and the easiest thing ever to rip off the state. And it shouldn't be this easy. Because lots of people just aren't going to turn down 10 million quid if they're turning over 80 grand a year. They're just not, John.
You say that. I mean, first of all, to answer the question, if I was in that position, I would like to think I wouldn't do that. But I don't know. I mean, it's very hard. We're all human beings, right? And if there's a prospect of, like, somebody says to you, look, here, 8 million in cash. Obviously, that's not pure profit. You have some costs and everything, but 8 million in cash over the next 5 years if you do this. And yeah, you'll be a bit unpopular with the locals, but you don't live there. So, like, what do you care? And by the way, you can hide it behind shell companies. Would we all be pure as the driven snow? I'd like to think I would be, but I don't know. I've never been in that position, Sarah. So
I'd like to think I would be too. But that's not the point. The point is that it shouldn't be the amount is just, the amount would make, the most honest person blush. Do you know, if I said to you, you're turning over 80 grand a year in the hotel, John, but you're being offered 150, you wouldn't dream of it.
Yeah, but
10 million quid, like, is a lot of money. And so it shouldn't be this easy to rip off the state. And that is a symptom of a system that is utterly broken, that there's no checks, there's no balances. There's nobody sitting there going, hold the show here. It's a small hotel or a small guest house or whatever, was never, even if they were printing money inside it, weren't going to be making this amount of money a year. So the state's not going to pay them for it.
But yeah, there's another point here though, Sarah, that I think is important that isn't really being talked about, which is this. Like, and comes back to my issue with the transparency and knowing who these people are. You, as our listeners and viewers will know, are a member of that august institution, the Law Library. And if you are a member of the Law Library, you're an independent, you're a self-employed person. But the Holy Grail, at least many years ago when I used to know many more members of the Law Library than I do now, the Holy Grail for a young barrister is to get that amazing thing called state work, right? And that is where, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, instead of being briefed to defend the guy who's whacked somebody over the head with a hammer, you're suddenly briefed by the DPP to prosecute him. And once you're on that list of state prosecutors, the reason it's the Holy Grail is that it's regular work, right? It's regular work you get, and it's a regular flow of work, and the state always pays. That's the other thing. You're not sitting around waiting for your defense guy to pay you up money in 6 months or having to chase a solicitor for money. The state always pays in good time. But the point is that for you to get that money, Sarah, how many hoops do you have to jump through? How many forms do you have to fill into the state? How many times do you have to submit your tax clearance certificate or show that you, if it's you, Sarah, Ryan, BL, or whoever are working for the state, that you are a fit person to work this, that you've good and impeccable business record. There's nothing preventing you receiving money from the state. Any company that does business with the state in the normal course of events has to jump through a whole series of hoops. Heck, if you are a landlord and you're renting your apartment in Dublin to somebody who's on HAP or the housing assistance payment, you need to submit a whole load of data to the state just to prove that you're a suitable person to receive that money. But when it's a shell company in a shell company in a shell company in a shell company, how do you know the people behind owning this stuff? How do you know that they're even tax compliant? You don't. And in many cases, when we've kind of done investigations, the level of information that the state seems to have in relation to who it's actually giving the money to is very thin. That's all I'll say.
And that's because, John, again, that getting that kind of information and those hoops, all those hoops take kind of 6 weeks at a time, adding up to months and months and months. And the state doesn't have that kind of time because the system is so overloaded.
Okay.
So, look, what you're seeing is a symptom of the house is on fire. We're not asking where the buckets of water are coming from. We're just going to take them. And the problem with that is that it's the taxpayer paying for it.
All right. Well, let's move a little bit. We've done 20 minutes on that, so let's move a little bit from the costs of the policy to the impacts of it, because I don't know if you saw my old mucker and county man and Sinn Fein TD for a life, according to the will of the voters of Monaghan, Mr. Matt Carthy, has announced that he's going to hold a public meeting in Carrickmacross, County Monaghan, to address what RTE described as unprecedented unease in the town. Now, have you watched the RTE programming or listened to their report? You would have no idea what this unease was about. You might think that Casper the Friendly Ghost had been seen hanging around street corners, or you might think that, a horde of invading seagulls had come and stolen the crisps from the kids' playground. It's just unease. The unease, in actual fact, Sarah, is in relation to an atmosphere that many local people feel has invaded the town since a large number of migrant people were moved into it by the state. You've got a large number of people who are kind of engaged in loitering on street corners. You've got some kind of apparently internal kind of ethnic conflict between various groups of migrants. You've got reports of sort of wolf whistling at the local females, sort of from early teenage years up. You had somebody brandishing a knife at drivers. I mean, there was a Romanian man who's actually been in court for allegedly brandishing a knife at motorists last week. And essentially the local people appear to have had enough. And Matt Carthy has decided to solve this problem by having a public meeting to address the unease. And there's two things that strike me about this. Number one, obviously, Matt Carthy himself is somebody who's very famously held a sign up in the European Parliament saying refugees welcome here. This has been his policy for years. And number two, the state, which in this case, appears to have just turned a perfectly nice, I mean, Carrickmacross, I'm from another part of County Monaghan. I would never have said it was a fantastic place, but Carrickmacross, that's just local rivalry. Sorry, Carrickmacross people. But Carrickmacross was a nice town.
Mm.
And now it is suddenly not a nice town as a direct result of the policy of the state. And this is happening all across the country and nobody cares. Or do they?
Well, Matt Carthy cares. He's about to have a meeting about it. Bless him. Talk about, like, Johnny come lately. I think Sinn Fein, what do I think about that? I don't know anything about this story, but I think the fact that Matt Carthy is acknowledging it all would to me indicate that there's something has gone very wrong there. Do you agree with that? I think if he's, I think Sinn Fein have gone out of their way to avoid conversations, criticisms, and any critique at any real level about migration in Ireland and whether or not it might be a problem. And I think that has cost them electorally in the past, to be perfectly honest. So I think the fact that he's holding a public meeting now would be a symptom of that something has gone horribly wrong.
Sorry, I've talked for more than half this podcast. Continue.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you tell me. Is it just a cynical ploy to be seen to be down with the locals, or is it actually that there's a problem, or Sinn Féin changing their strategy, or is it just so glaringly glaringly bad that he has to do something or he might lose his seat the next time. I mean, what are we talking about here?
It's the same fucking nonsense with Sinn Fein that we've had for years. And I don't like using this bad language, but they play both sides of the issue. So last Saturday in Dublin, there's a march of people concerned about immigration. And it marches through the city centre. And I don't agree with everything that was said at that march or all the signs that were held up around that, but it's a very, very large march of people marches through the city centre. Many of them from communities, Sarah, that I think that would previously have had a strong Sinn Fein voting record. Not all of them, but many of them. And there's a counter-protest that calls them all Nazis and fascists. And the counter-protest is supported by, amongst others, Sinn Fein. So Sinn Fein is there to counter-protest saying, you people who are objecting to immigration into your communities and the impact it's having, you are racists and you are fascists. And then the very same Sinn Fein party in the persona of Matt Carthy is standing up in Carrickmacross going, there's unease in the town now and, we have to address this unease by having a public meeting. They are trying to play both sides. I mean, and this is the thing. If you are a Sinn Fein voter, a Sinn Fein voter who's concerned about this, you're being taken for a fool. If you are one of those Sinn Fein voters who only cares about Sinn Fein getting into office and doesn't care about what they say to whoever they say to get there, then you're not being taken for a fool. You're just watching the party take both sides of an issue for electoral advantage. And there are a lot of you out there who are partisan Sinn Feiners who don't care about that. But if you're a regular voter, you're played for an absolute idiot by this lot. So that's what I think in the first instance.
With all due respect to Sinn Fein voters, if you're a regular voter who is still voting for a regular Sinn Fein voter who's still voting for Sinn Fein after watching them flip-flop and talk out both sides of their mouth on a number of key issues for the last 5 years minimum, well, you've nobody really to blame but yourself. Sorry.
Well, you don't know what you're going to get when Matt Carthy is in government as a minister for something or other. Is it going to be Matt Carthy holding up the sign saying refugees are welcome here? Or is it going to be Matt Carthy saying it's time to address the impact of refugees being welcome here in Carrickmacross? You don't know which one you're going to get. So,
it can be Matt Carthy doing whatever Matt Carthy wants to do. The point is that Sinn Fein always were and always marketed themselves, for want of a better word, as being there for a voice of people, a voice of marginalised people, a voice for people who felt like the state will say, didn't represent them. And now they're not. Now they're part of the establishment. I mean, like even your most hardcore Sinn Fein voter would have to not agree with me on that, but would have to really sort of admit that Sinn Fein, to a point, are now part of the establishment. They toe the line on most of the issues that annoy people about the government. They don't have a unique position at all on a lot of stuff. And they flip-flop and go whatever way the wind is blowing on most things. I mean, Sinn Fein, Mary Lou is probably, if she sat down with Micheál Martin, I would say they agree on a good chunk of things. Would you not?
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, that was apparent, I think, even during the election. Even their differences on housing are not nearly so great as they pretend. It both comes down to spend lots more public money in slightly different ways. I mean, there's no real massive difference in what they want to do. But I do want to say one thing, which is that somewhere right now in a corner of the internet, maybe it's below this video on YouTube. By the way, just going to say this right now. Last week at the end of the podcast, I said that in the previous week's podcast, I had said something that was wrong and I should correct it. Do you know what it was? I described the Australian app Giggle as a lesbian dating app. Apparently, it's just a social app for women. And if you're on Giggle, you're not necessarily a lesbian, Sarah. You're just a woman who likes chatting to other women. So I got that one wrong and I'm sorry.
All of our Australian lesbian listeners will be delighted with that, Carrie.
But right now, somewhere in those comments, there's somebody writing something along the lines of, I can't believe that Sinn Féin have never been in government. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have been in government for the last 10 years, pushing 20 years in the case of Fine Gael. And there's McGurk, the kind of blue shirt sympathizer, and Ryan, the kind of half ex, maybe Fianna Fáiler, sitting there blaming the Shinners for what's happening in Carrickmacross. That's a disgrace. So it is. You're deflecting the blame onto the opposition.
Not blaming them.
That's fair criticism. We're not blaming them, is the point. We're just saying that their reaction is hypocritical.
Nobody's blaming Matt Carthy. For what's happening in Carrickmacross. We just literally spent 20 minutes, as you said, talking about how it is the government's fault that this amount of money is being spent, and a government failure that this amount of money is being spent on this issue, and that it's being dealt with in the way that it is. The criticism of Matt Carthy. But the criticism of Matt Carthy is twofold. First of all, Johnny come lately can't show up and start being down with the people when the issue gets so bad, I'd imagine, that it's glaringly obvious that he'll lose his seat if he doesn't. And second of all, and I've said it on the podcast before, obviously Sinn Fein have never been in government, thank God. But at the same time, Sinn Fein owe the people, considering the large amount of people who do vote for them, and the people who didn't, by the way, because the government is the government of everybody, not just the people who voted for them. And the opposition should be the opposition for everybody, not just the people who didn't or who voted for them. And we deserve opposition. We deserve an opposition that challenged the government on some of the big issues. And we've been left wanting from Sinn Fein for a long, long time.
Yeah, there's just this quote that is called to mind from Edmund Burke, the father of modern conservatism, an Irish guy, an Irish Protestant guy. If you've never heard of Edmund Burke, I'm sure most of you have. And he said about a representative or a TD, or in his time there were no TDs, it was all MPs, but he was discussing the nature of democracy, and he said about a representative owes you his best judgment. So if you vote for me, he said, I'm not going to go and agree with you all the time, but I'm going to give you my best judgment. I'm going to vote according to my best judgment. And all I can think of in that quote is Matt Carthy holding up a sign saying refugees welcome here. That was his best judgment. His best judgment for years has been that people who objected to this stuff were wrong, that they were racist, that they might be bigoted, that they were xenophobic, that they might be extreme, that they might be far right. And now that the impact of his judgment is being felt in his own town, he's not willing to stand up and say, I got it wrong. He's instead trying to instead trying to solve the problem that he had a part in creating. And I think it is the duty of people like us in our little small corner of the internet here to call that out. That's all I think in relation to the Sinn Féin stuff. I mean, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil are in government. They are the people making the decisions. I'm not telling anyone to vote for them. I mean, well, I'm saying in this particular case, I think the hypocrisy is worth highlighting. Moving on to Fianna Fáil, sir. What did you make of Micheál Martin's take on Irish republicanism?
I mean, last week on the podcast, I think it was last week or one of the weeks on the podcast, we touched briefly on the mainstream inclination towards reimagining what people stood for in the past. So, for example, I think we were talking about, I mentioned, when the establishment will say, oh, this saint actually performed the first abortion and this person was actually a feminist, and where they are so incapable of liking anybody who has any views that they don't agree with, so that they just reimagine them for the modern day, even if it's factually completely incorrect. And it reminded me a bit of that. Why can anything not just be sacred and just left as it was at the time? Why does everything have to be dragged into some new interpretation? And I think it's because, well, I don't know what it's because, but I found that to be cynical and embarrassing, to be honest. And I know Micheál is a historian and he's somebody who, knows a lot about Irish history. And he was a teacher. He's not stupid. But I just think what he did there was really, first of all, not necessary. You don't have to reimagine anything that anybody was thinking at the time to try and put some new spin on it. But also kind of offensive.
I wasn't offended, but then I don't consider myself to be a particularly Republican person, but I wasn't offended. I was amused by it. Like, what he said was that the leaders of 1916 envisaged a kind of nationalism that was inclusive and internationalist, which is just absolute, like, it's so wrong. It's so wrong as to defy belief, because if you look at just pure historical context, let's look at the wave of nationalism that was taking across Europe at that time. 2 years earlier, the First World War had started because Gavrilo Princip stood in Sarajevo and shot the Austrian Archduke in the name of a Serbia for the Serbians, an independent Serbia. The same kind of movement was breaking out right across the continent. The Irish nationalist movement was no different. It was about, now is the time for our self-determination, to have an Irish nation for the Irish people. If you were an internationalist, you would be quite happy to have remained in the United Kingdom. This is the very idea of internationalism is at odds with the war in 1916, because nobody denied the distinct character and identity of the Irish nation. This is I'm not trying to be revisionist about this or anything else. Nobody denied the distinct character of the Irish nation, or that we were a distinct nation inside the United Kingdom, any more than people deny that the Scots are a distinct nation today or that the Welsh are a distinct nation. That's internationalist. You can recognize that they're distinct peoples and they all have their different cultures and all the rest of it. The nationalist Irish spirit said, we want a country for our own. We want an Ireland that is for the Irish people, governed by the Irish people, in the interests of the Irish people, instead of simply being a distinct nation inside a community or a community of kingdoms, which is governed from London, primarily possibly for the benefit of people living in London. For right or wrong, that was the nationalism of the day. It had nothing to do with internationalism. There was no sense of, we want to be part of a community of nations. It was, we want an Ireland for the Irish. It's just so flat wrong. And I think it is self-serving. I think one of the reasons that he is redefining what nationalism meant is because he is the leader, he's the heir to the people who fought that war of independence. Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, both parties in different ways present themselves as the heirs to that generation. And what did that generation want? They wanted an independent Ireland, they wanted a Gaelic Ireland, they wanted a distinctive Ireland. Have they gotten an independent Ireland? Well, 85% of the counties are independent, the other 6 remain in the community of nations of the United Kingdom. Have they gotten a Gaelic Ireland? Well, in parts of the country. Have we gotten a distinctive Ireland? Well, we're about as distinctive as Boston or New York when it comes to any other international cities, except we've slightly more crime. So I think the reason he's trying to redefine nationalism in 1916 is because it's, well, this is all we could manage, so this is all you ever wanted. You know? All we could manage was a bit of distinctly vague international, global whateverism. So that's what they must have wanted.
But it's not up to him to reimagine what the motivation or the thinking or nationalism was at the time. You don't get to put your own take on something like that. That's a part of our history. It's not up for the Taoiseach of the day to decide. Do you know what I mean? You can't just add things and add sentiments in that weren't there, whether you like it or not. And that's why I do think it's offensive. I mean, why not? You know, when James Connolly was injured in the GPO and his wounds were being tended to by Dr. James Ryan, I actually believe that he screamed out trans rights or human rights when that was happening. Because, you know, that's my new interpretation of that. Well, why don't we just say that as well? James Connolly was a known trans rights activist. His spirit.
You got Dr. James Ryan in there, I noticed, your ancestor, who's actually in the GPO. Him and 2.3 million other people. Yeah,
exactly. I don't know. You don't even say it because everyone says it. So even when it's true, it sounds not true. But the point is, like, why don't we just put modern interpretations on everything? Because that's what's hip. This isn't even an Irish thing. You see it in TV. Do you ever notice this TV shows where they do they have different races of people in playing things in Edwardian or Victorian times that couldn't possibly have been there. Do you know what I mean? Just ignore Bridgerton. Just ignoring it completely. I can't. Absurd.
I've said, just on this, I can't watch Bridgerton. I can't watch Bridgerton because it positions itself. When you're watching Bridgerton, it purports to take you to Regency era England. You know, during the reign of George IV, his father is mad, and you know, you're supposed to be in London, and all these aristocrats are having tremendous amount of probably acrobatic sex. And it's all very exciting and entertaining. Except I know, because I've read my history, that 99.99999% of the people in Regency era England, particularly in the aristocracy, were as white as the driven snow and probably had bad yellow teeth. And instead what we have are about 50-50 racially mixed cast of apparently African, indigenously, genetically African people with shiny white teeth playing the dukes of stuff. So I can't believe that what I'm watching is what I'm supposed to be watching. I'm watching some kind of fantasy series. If you want to make that, why don't you just set it on Mars or something?
Well, to be fair to Micheál, I mean, if that's the world we're living in, everyone's allowed to have their own hot take on history and reinterpret it. So, you know, GPO was stormed by trans rights activists and they had trans flags on their waving, and they why not?
Yeah. No, it drives me nutty, I have to say. The other thing though is and if you are a Gript reader, you got my weekly email to the readers this week, as you get every week, which is, I don't know. A lot of you seem to like it and reply to it. I'm sure others just find it self-indulgent, long and boring. But I was making the point in it that actually this whole, his kind of redefinition of nationalism and the whole kneecap thing and the whole kind of Irish approach to the Palestinian thing, I think they're all connected, Sarah. Because what's interesting about the whole support for the Palestinians, and I'm making no comment, people know my views on that conflict, but the Palestinians, their cause is a blood and soil nationalism cause. It is, this is our land, our blood is tied to it, we are people who live here and have a right to our own land, and all these interloping people, be they Jews or whoever else they are, can go home, it's our land. That's the romance of the Palestinian cause. And it is also, we are told that is why it resonates so much in Ireland. It resonates in Ireland, right? It's kind of like, it's an echo of our own colonial history that the West Bank is being planted in essence.
Yeah.
And that's why we identify so much. But actually, our own nationalism is much, much closer to Israel's. Like, because what's Micheál Martin doing at home? He's taking loads of people who aren't Irish and he's putting them in Carrickmacross where there's no unease. And he's saying that there's absolutely nothing to worry about. This is a perfectly normal thing. So we are on the Palestinian side, but our government's actions in relation to like apparently protecting people's rights to live in areas that are entirely Palestinian and non-Jewish or entirely Irish and non-foreign, their attitude to it is entirely different at home than it is overseas. I think it is all fascinating. Or have I gone too far?
No, I don't think you've gone too far. I think it's all connected, but I think it goes back to the thing all the time, which is people who are running with ideas or ideals and have opinions on complex issues that have been spoon-fed to them by somebody else that they don't really understand. Cool and hip interpretations of things that are very shallow and lack any depth of thinking. And this is the result.
Yeah. Look, normally at this stage of the podcast, folks, I like to switch it to something lighter. We've obviously done kind of hot and heavy immigration for a while and talked about the nationalism and all that sort of stuff. And normally at this stage, it's useful to have Lily Phillips or some porn star doing something outrageous or somebody getting divorced or so. I don't know. We don't have that. So instead, I'll just ask you about Regina Doherty and all those genders. She went on RTE last Sunday, Sarah, and she said that she no longer thinks I don't want to misquote her. She said she's no longer sure that the evidence she was relying on when she said that there were 9 genders, she's no longer sure that would stand up today. So as far as I can tell, as best I can tell, the best position of Regina Doherty, MEP for Dublin, member of the European Parliament, is that she's gone from thinking there are 9 genders to not being entirely clear how many there are. What do you...
Okay, it didn't stand up to scrutiny on the day you said it either, you fucking niff-nuff. But no, I'm sorry. The F word twice in one podcast, John. But it's funny in a way, right? And I'm glad to a point that some of these people are being forced, I'd say, kicking and screaming, because it was actually brought up by Michael McDowell, I believe, before she didn't volunteer this mild or slight retraction, but are being forced to account for their nonsense that they were saying only a short while ago about gender, right? So I'm glad that this is being called out, but this is a serious person. This is a person who is a representative, and worse than anything else, in my opinion, this is a woman who betrayed other women by pretending that that woman face was something that you could put on with lipstick and a wig and a dress, and carried on and made a show of herself and us by going abroad and saying that there was 9 genders. This is a woman who was elected to the European Parliament subsequently. So we deserve, I don't know what, but anyway, that's besides the point.
Can I just make a point on that?
I just think on the one hand, I, as somebody who has been very vocal from very much at the beginning of this entire absolutely mortifying part of our political life story, I've been very vocal on this issue right from the start. So obviously when I see some companies starting to distance themselves with some of the who's allowed in what toilet brigade or NGOs and stuff like that in the UK. When I see this starting to, and obviously the decision in Scotland, when I see this starting to unravel just a little bit, obviously somebody like me who cares about science and facts and women's rights is happy. But on the other hand, I just think the fact that how can we take you seriously? How can we take you seriously on anything you say when you will switch your position like the weather on something so basic as this? And they go, oh, it wouldn't really stand up to scrutiny now. It didn't stand up to scrutiny then. There was no science. You just went along. You put your finger up in the air, felt what way the wind was blowing and went with it because you don't have the courage. You don't have the courage to state facts, and you didn't have the courage to stand up to other women. So spare me now. It wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. It never did. Twit.
Well, my answer is what scrutiny? Because my thing on this is, if you're a Gript reader, if you've watched this podcast since the beginning, you probably heard about Regina Doherty and her 9 genders. If you're on the internet regularly, you probably heard of Regina Doherty and her 9 genders.
Sorry, John, to interrupt you, but I think I used to call her old 9 genders Doherty.
Yes, you did.
Or at least.
But if you... But let me finish the point because it's an important one. Because she was like, I don't think it would stand up to scrutiny. Well, she got through an entire European Parliament election with several debates on RTE Radio and several invitations onto RTE Radio. And I believe this is the first time RTE Radio have ever asked her about her position on how many genders there are, even when she was standing for election. And my point is this: if you're a Gript reader, or if you're listening to Sarah and me on the podcast, or if you read a whole load of other internet platforms where this has been a joke for so many years about Regina and her 9 genders, you'll have known about this. But if you are a well-to-do sort of 60-year-old person living in the southern half of County Dublin who gets his news or her news from Morning Ireland or the Today, whatever the RTE, I don't listen to RTE, I don't even know what the programs are called. I don't care what they're called. But if you get your news from those programs, I don't think you would have heard until this weekend that she ever believed there were 9 genders. And now you're finding out after the election. So she's like, I don't think it would stand up to scrutiny. The only reason it didn't stand up to scrutiny is that no one ever scrutinized it. It's laughable.
And she also expanded on the past, or on the point where she gave herself a bit of a pass and said that it was really all about, people's feelings and people who are struggling and whatever. But she didn't care about women or women's rights or the women in prisons and the women in women's sports or any of that. None of that mattered. It was just about hurty words and feelings. And I was worried about people's feelings. It's just another way of saying I was scared of getting given out to by people. So I just went with whatever way the wind is blowing. And frankly, I just want better politicians than that.
Yeah, but I want better journalists.
True.
Because RTE have her there. She's in the studio. She's just said, I'm not sure there's 9 genders anymore. I can't make head nor tail of that. That mightn't stand up to scrutiny. It's an open goal. You're the presenter. You've got her right there in front of you. All you have to say is...
She's on the ropes.
So Regina, how many genders are there? That's it. It's the only question. And just let it hang there in silence.
Just whisper.
Yeah, just wait till she gives the answer. Did she say 7? Does she say 2?
Before you
Does
go,
she say,
what is a woman?
I know. It's so easy. It's not only is it an easy question, it's the obvious question. How many genders are there? It's not the most. Some people think, I know the lads over at the Ditch with their communist ways, by the way, who were endorsing the counter-protest to the protest last week. The Ditch, supposedly an independent media outlet that's taking on the establishment, is standing there with all the establishment left-wing NGOs to protest a bunch of people protesting the state, whatever. But the lads at the Ditch sometimes mock us at Gript for our apparent obsession with that what is a woman, how many genders question that we sometimes ask politicians. But I think it's a fundamental question because it shows if you exist on the plane of reality. Or do you remember in Father Ted all those years ago, there was that cartoon of Father Dougal with the words dreams and reality being interchanged from his head. Do you remember that? In an episode, I think it's something to do with rabbits or something. It's a fundamental question to see if you are Father Dougal or if you are somebody a little bit more suitable for high office.
But even if a politician was asked that and they were, even if they said, because it's how I determine. It's not actually, even though it sounds like it's very important for me that they agree with me, fine. But how they manage the question tells me everything I need to know about who they are. So even if somebody said, listen, I think that this is a trap question that's going to get me into loads of trouble with loads of people on the internet, and I'm not prepared to answer it either way, I'd have more respect. Do you know what I mean? But instead it's, well, you know, I just read somewhere online that there's 9 genders and there's, you know, billions of euro on NGOs that are paid to lobby us, and I'm afraid of what they'll do to my local vote if I tell the truth. So I'm going to throw the junior cert biology book into the bin and pretend that there's 9 genders. Because I know that'll save me and RTE will protect me.
The thing that has always struck me about Regina Doherty, and I say this, by the way, I'll say this. I've met Regina on a number of occasions, after programs, before programs, various things. She's a very nice person in person. I'll just say that, put that on the record. And what I say is not personal, but I'm going to say it anyway. I've always been struck by Regina Doherty that if you were to transport Regina Doherty back in time to, say, 1950s Ireland and say, I want you to go ahead and succeed in politics and really change Ireland for the better. I guarantee you that within half an hour, I won't guarantee it, but I would not be surprised if within half an hour she wasn't an RTE denouncing illegitimate mothers of bastards and the curse of sort of immorality in Ireland and how there was too much, how it needs to go back to the church. She's that kind of person. She is.
Well, if you can go from 9 genders, to not 9 genders in the space of a couple of years, you could over the space of 50 years, you definitely could have changed your opinion as well. So yeah, you know, it's whatever way the wind is blowing. And John, to be honest, on the other hand, yes, we would. You and I know lots of people who are in politics, and lots of people who are in politics are really nice people. And I don't think I've ever met Regina Doherty. I'm sure she is a really, really nice person, but you're a man with all due respect to you, and I'm a woman, and this issue matters more to me than it does to you for reasons that are dangerous to women in lots of situations. And whether or not she's a nice person or not is actually irrelevant to me. She showed unbelievable cowardice. She didn't have to go and give speeches about 9 genders. She could have kept her trap shut. So not only did she see what way the wind was blowing, but she said things that were unscientific and bad for women and dangerous for some women. Women in prisons, as I said, women in certain spaces. And I don't care if she's nice or not. She's an idiot.
It is. Look, I was just thinking there, it is more important to you. And the reason it's more important to you is basic biology, right? I am not threatened. If somebody comes swaggering into the male changing room with a bit of bum fluff on their face and scars where their boobs used to be and an artificially deep voice going, I am Joe, I am a man now. That doesn't threaten me.
No.
Whereas unfortunately, you know, women face more pressing concerns.
But the changing room and all that kind of stuff, that's all fine and that's all like very obvious or whatever. And we could that's the pantomime, that's the tabloid part of this whole issue. But this whole issue of being a woman and what is a woman and being allowed to call yourself a woman, and is part of a more fundamental thing for women, for mothers, for girls, about the dismantling of things that are sacred to women. You know, like changing breastfeeding pamphlets in the UK to chest feeding and these kind of things. A part of I think, deeply misogynistic movement against women. It's important to a lot of women that we're seen as that biology is taken into account when it comes to women. And she allowed herself to be basically. She went into a cult. She had adopted the cult mindset on this issue because she didn't have the courage. And I take real offence to that.
As is your right. I was going to talk about the carbon tax, but I don't know, if we have time. It's gone up again. I might do a whole lengthier segment on that on a future podcast, but I think I was just making the point during the week, Sarah, that it's just a completely failed tax. The whole point of it was to make green energy more attractive. So the idea was you were supposed to drive up the cost of diesel in a diesel car, and the government would also artificially subsidize electric cars so that eventually they'd get the market to rebalance in favor of everyone buying the electric car. It hasn't worked. And we've ended up, after a decade of this nonsense from the Greens, who are now blessedly out of government, with the highest electricity prices in all of Europe. So I don't know if we have time. Did you have any brief thoughts on that?
And petrol.
And petrol.
So
everything.
Like, obviously it has consequences for everything. But I mean, when we were talking about the, people making money in hotels and whatever, I just was thinking about this exact thing about petrol and how much everything costs and cost of living. And cost of living has kind of gone off I feel like it's gone off the political agenda or the radar a little bit. But when you start to talk about hundreds of millions and billions of, on being given to small companies and individuals who own guest houses and whatever, I think for the person who's spending hundreds and hundreds of euro on their car just to get to work, it's just something.
I was speaking on the cost of living. I mean, I think first of all, I think we will do a full episode, or what we did today on immigration, or we kind of did, the first entire half of the episode on immigration. We may do that on sort of climate, carbon tax, and all of that at some point over the next couple of weeks. But cost of living as well. I don't know. I found myself in the supermarket a couple of weeks ago because I do. It's my one contribution to the welfare of the household is I go and I do the weekly shopping every week. It makes me feel very manly. Literally bring home the bacon. Even though my wife's kind of a vegetarian, but bring it home for me. But I found myself picking up a pound of butter and looking at the price. And I'm not one of these people who, I know what my weekly shop sort of should cost, right? I don't really look at the prices of individual items. Maybe I should. I've this pound of Kerrygold butter that was £5. And I went home and I thought that sounds like a lot. And I went home and looked, and like literally a year ago it was £3.50. So that's over a 50% increase in the price of a single staple good over the last year that no one's really talking about. Now, I have noticed that the prices of groceries in particular for the last couple of years are just, they're just spiraling.
Yeah, I've really noticed as well, and Keith and I were talking about it, like kid stuff. So obviously, we've just finished 2 weeks of Easter holidays for the kids, and I brought the kids away for a few days. People know because I did the podcast from there. I brought them to Kilkenny to the Newbridge Hotel, the Dinosaur Hotel, if you're ever so inclined, John. Or it has a dinosaur park. I know, my kids do too. And they loved it or whatever. But the previous week that they were off for the Easter holidays, the weather wasn't good. It was raining loads of days, if you remember. And I brought the kids one day to one of these bouncing beyond, these bouncing kind of centres. And then the next day to the cinema. And like the cinema. So it was me and then an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. And it was like €58 just to go in. And then obviously then they want
popcorn.
Stuff. Yeah. So it's like €75 to bring 3 small kids to the cinema. And then the day before in Bounce and Beyond, it was like 58 or something to bring them and then get them a drink or whatever. And I was like, said to Keith, it's 2 days, minor things. And just looking over £100 and it just wasn't that expensive a couple of years ago.
Yeah, the thing we've noticed in this house, and I've said it to several people, and if this doesn't apply to you and you think we're very extreme in our house, then by all means tell me. But like I know I've spoken to several people about this. It kind of feels like it's very hard to leave the house these days without coming back €50 per hour. That there's almost everywhere you go, you're spending at least £50 on something. Which is kind of makes you just want to stay at home and hide, which is why I do precisely that a lot.
Also,
anyway,
that's because you don't like, public.
That's why I have you on the screen. You're just kind of like I'm talking to you virtually because I just don't like
human beings. Yeah,
I'm kidding.
Just like dogs.
Look, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much to all our listeners every week who make this worth doing. We'll forgive the fact that so many more of you seem to like Jason and Ben than Sarah and I last week, but seriously, it's great to see their podcast going from strength to strength as well. And if you've missed that, you should take a listen to it. You should also listen to Gary and Fatima, who do their weeklies. It's not a podcast, it's more a live stream. You can catch that on YouTube every Wednesday around lunchtime. And we will have more new content coming to you over the course of the year. And do keep an eye out on the Gript site for the stuff we were talking about at the start of the show. Until then, I'll reiterate my wish for you all to have a happy bank holiday weekend. Thank you for listening to Sarah and I. We will see you next week, and take care.